Meet George Beard and Harold Hutchins. George is the kid on the left with the tie and the flat top. Harold is the one on the right with the t-shirt and the bad haircut. Remember that now. They had a lot in common. They lived right next door to each other, and they were both in the same 4th grade class at Jerome Horwitz Elementary School. George and Harold were usually responsible kids. Whenever anything bad happened, George and Harold were usually responsible. But don't get the wrong idea about those two. George and Harold were actually very nice boys. No matter what everybody else thought, they were good, sweet, and lovable. Well, okay, maybe they weren't so sweet and lovable, but they were good nonetheless. It's just that George and Harold each had a silly streak a mile long. Usually, that silly streak was hard to control. Sometimes, it got them into trouble. And once, it got them into big trouble. But before I can tell you that story, I have to tell you this story. After a hard day of cracking jokes, pulling pranks, and causing mayhem at school, George and Harold liked to rush to the old treehouse in George's backyard. Inside the treehouse were 2 big old fluffy chairs, a table, a cupboard crammed with junk food, and a padlocked crate filled with pencils, pens, and stacks of paper. Now, Harold loved to draw, and George loved to make up stories, and together, the 2 boys spent hours and hours writing and drawing their very own comic books. Over the years, they had created hundreds of their own comics, starring dozens of their own superheroes. First, there was Dogman, then came Timmy the Talking Toilet, and who could forget the Amazing Cow Lady? But the all-time greatest superhero they ever made up had to be the amazing Captain Underpants. George came up with the idea. Most superheroes look like they're flying around with their underwear, he said. Well, this guy's actually flying around in his underwear. The 2 boys laughed and laughed. Yeah, he could fight with wedgie power, said Harold. George and Harold spent entire afternoons writing and drawing the comic adventures of Captain Underpants. He was the coolest superhero ever. Luckily for the boys, the secretary at Jerome Horwitz Elementary School was too much busy to keep an eye on the copy machine. So whenever they got a chance, Harold and George would sneak into the office and run off several hundred copies of their latest Captain Underpants adventure. After school, they sold their homemade comics on the playground for 50 cents each. Do you see that old guy looking out the window up there? That's Mr. Krupp, the principal. Now, Mr. Krupp was the meanest, sourest old principal in the whole history of Jerome Horwitz Elementary School. He hated laughter and singing. He hated the sounds of children playing at recess. In fact, he hated children altogether. And guess which 2 children Mr. Krupp hated most of all? If you guessed George and Harold, you're right! Mr. Krupp hated George and Harold. He hated their pranks and their wisecracks. He hated their silly attitudes and their constant giggling. And he especially hated those awful Captain Underpants comic books. I'm going to get those boys one day, Mr. Mr. Crump vowed. One day. Very, very soon. Remember when I said that George and Harold's silly streak got them into big trouble once? Well, this is the story of how that happened, and how some huge pranks turned into Principal into the coolest superhero of all time. It was the day of the big football game between the Horwitz Knuckleheads and the Starmanville Stinkbugs. The bleachers were filled with fans. The cheerleaders ran onto the field and shook their pom-poms over their heads. A fine black dust drifted out of their pom-poms and settled all around them. "Give me a K!" shouted the cheerleaders. "K!" repeated the fans. "Give me an N!" shouted the cheerleaders. "N!" repeated the fans. "Give me an R!" Achoo! sneezed the cheerleaders. Achoo! repeated the fans. The cheerleaders sneezed and sneezed some more. They couldn't stop sneezing. "Hey!" shouted a fan in the bleachers. "Somebody sprinkled black pepper into the cheerleaders' pom-poms." "I wonder who did that?" asked another fan. The cheerleaders stumbled off the field, sneezing and dripping with mucus, as the marching band members took their places. But when the band began to play, steady streams of bubbles began blowing out of their instruments. Bubbles were everywhere, up and down the field. The marching band slipped and slid, leaving behind a thick trail of wet, bubbly foam. "Hey!" shouted the fan in the bleachers. "Somebody poured bubble bath into the marching band's instruments." "I wonder who did that?" asked another fan. Soon, the football teams took the field. The knuckleheads kicked the ball, up, and the ball. Higher and higher it went. The ball sailed into the clouds and kept right on going until nobody could see it anymore. "Hey!" shouted the fan in the bleachers. "Somebody filled the game ball with helium." "I wonder who did that?" asked another fan. But the missing ball didn't make any difference, because at that moment, the knuckleheads were rolling around the field, scratching and itching like crazy. "Hey!" shouted the coach. "Somebody replaced our deep heating muscle rub lotion with Mr. Pregnancy Extra Scratchy Itching cream. We wonder who did that," shouted the fans in the bleachers. The whole afternoon went on much the same way, with people shouting everything from "Hey!" somebody put tea monkeys in the lemonade to "Hey!" somebody glued all the bathroom doors shut. Before long, most of the fans in the bleachers had gotten up and left. The big game had been forfeited, and everyone in the entire school was miserable. Everyone, that is, except for two giggling boys crouching in the shadows beneath the bleachers. "Those were our best pranks yet," laughed Harold. "Yep," Jack called George. "They'll be hard to top, that's for sure." "I just hope we don't get busted for this," said Howard. "Don't worry," said George. "We've covered our jokes really well. There's no way we'll get busted." The next day at school, an announcement came over the loudspeakers. "George Beard now in action! Please report to Principal Cups on this at once!" "Uh-oh," said Harold. "I don't like the sound of that." "Don't worry," said George. "They can't prove anything." George and Harold entered Principal Crump's office and sat down on the chairs in front of his desk. The two boys had been in this office together countless times before, but this time was different. Mr. Crump was smiling. As long as George and Harold had known Mr. Crump, they had never ever seen him smile. Mr. Crump knew something. "I didn't see it was the big game yesterday," said Mr. Crump. No," said George. "We weren't feeling well." Yeah, Harold sounded nervously. We went home." "Oh, that's too bad," said Crump. "Good boys, this is a good game." George and Harold quickly glanced at each other, gulped, and tried hard not to look guilty. "Look for you, I have a videotape of the whole thing," Mr. Crump said. He turned on the television into quarter and pressed the play button on the VCR. A black and white image appeared on the TV screen. It was an overhead shot of George and Harold sprinkling pepper into the cheerleaders' pom-poms. Next came a shot of George and Harold pouring liquid bubble bath into the marching band's instruments. "How do you like the pre-game show?" asked Mr. Crump with his devilish grin. George eyed the television screen in terror. He couldn't answer. Harold's eyes were glued to the floor. He couldn't look. The tape went on and on, revealing all of George and Harold's behind-the-scenes antics. But now both boys were eyeing the floor, squirming nervously and dripping with sweat. Mr. Crump turned off the TV. "You know, ever since you boys came to this school, it's been one prank after another. First, you put dissected frogs in the Jello salad at the parent-teacher banquet. Then you made it snow in the cafeteria. Then you rigged Donnie into come so they played Weird Al Yankovic songs full blast for 6 hours straight. For 4 long years, you two have been rubbing that mock in this school, and I've never been able to prove anything until now. Mr. Cup held the videotape in his hand. I took the liberty of installing tiny video surveillance cameras all around the school. I knew I'd catch you two in the act one day. I just didn't know it would be so easy. Mr. Crump sat back in his chair and chuckled to himself for a long, long time. Finally, George got up the courage to speak. Well, what are you going to do with that tape? He said. I thought you'd never ask, laughed Principal Cup. I thought long and hard about what to do with this tape, Mr. Cup said. At first, I thought I'd send copies to your parents. The boys swallowed hard and sank deeply into their chairs. Then I thought I might send a copy to the school board, Mr. Cup continued. I could get you both expelled for this. The boys swallowed harder and sank deeper into their chairs. Finally, I came to a decision, Mr. Cup concluded. I think the football team would be very curious to find out just who was responsible for yesterday's fiasco. I think I'll send a copy to them. George and Harold leaped out of their chairs and fell to their knees. No! Cried George. You can't do that, they'll kill us. Yeah, begged Harold. They'll kill us every day for the rest of our lives. Mr. Cup laughed and laughed. Please have mercy, we'll do anything! The boys cried. Anything? Asked Principal Crump. With delight, he reached to his desk, pulled out a list of demands, tossed it at the boys. If you don't want to be dead as long as you live, you'll follow these rules exactly. George and Harold carefully looked over the list. This is blackmail, said George. Call it what you like, Principal Cup snapped. But if you two don't follow that list exactly, then this tape becomes the property of the whole knuckleheads. At 6 o'clock the next morning, George and Harold dragged themselves out of bed, walked over to Mr. Crump's house, and began washing his car. Then while Harold scrubbed the tires, George roamed around the yard until he dug up all the weeds and crap grass he could find. Afterwards, they cleaned the gutters and washed all the windows of Mr. Crump's house. At school, George and Harold sat up straight, listened carefully, and spoke only when spoken to. They didn't tell jokes, they didn't pull pranks, they didn't even smile. Their teacher kept pinching herself. I know this is just a dream, she said. At lunch, the two boys vacuumed Mr. Crump's office, shined his shoes and polished his desktop. At recess, they clipped his fingernails and ironed his tie. Each spare moment in the boys' daily schedule was spent catering to Mr. Crump's every whim. After school, George and Harold mowed Mr. Crump's lawn, tended his garden, and began painting the front of his house. At sunset, Mr. Crump came outside and handed each boy a stack of books. Gentlemen, he said, I'm asking your teachers to give you both extra homework. Now go home, study hard, and I'll see you back here at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. We've got a busy day ahead of us. Thank you, sir, moaned the two boys. George and Harold walked home dead tired. Man, this was the worst day of my entire life, said George. Don't worry, said Harold. We'll have to do this for 8 more years, then we can move away to some far-off land where they never find us. Maybe Antarctica. I've got a better idea, said George. He took a piece of paper out of his pocket and handed it to Harold. It was an old magazine ad for the Frida Hypno ring. How's this going to help us? Asked Harold. All we're going to do is hypnotize Mr. Crump, said George. We'll make him give us the video and forget this whole mess ever happened. That's a great idea, said Harold. And the best part is we only have to wait 4 to 6 weeks for delivery. After 4 to 6 weeks of backbreaking, slave-bending, homework assignments, and accumulating good behavior, at school, a package arrived from George's mailbox and Real Wise by Novelty Company. It was the Frida Hypno ring. Hallelujah! Cried George. It's everything I've hoped for! Let me see, said Howard. Don't look directly at it, warned George. You don't want to get hypnotized, do you? Do you really think it will work? Asked Harold. Do you really think we can amaze our friends, control our enemies, and take over the world just like the ad says? It better work, said George, or else we just wasted 4 whole bucks. The next morning, George and Harold didn't arrive early at Mr. Crump's house to wash his car and reshingle his roof. In fact, they were even a little late getting to school. When they finally showed up, Mr. Crump was standing at the front door waiting for them. And boy, he was mad! Mr. Crump escorted the boys into his office and slammed the door. "I worried you two this morning," he growled. "We wanted to come over to your house, said George. But we were busy trying to figure out the secret of this ring. What ring? Snapped Mr. Crump. George held his hand and showed the ring to Principal Cup. It's got one of those weird patterns on it, said Harold. If you stand it long enough, a picture appears. Well, hold it still. Sorry, Mr. Crump. I can't see the damn thing! I have to move it back and forth, said George, or else it won't work. Mr. Crump's eyes followed the ring back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and back and forth. You have to stand deeper into the ring, said Harold. Deeper, 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 deeper. You're getting sleepy, said George. Very sleepy. Mr. Crump's eyelids began to droop. I'm so sleepy, he mumbled. After a few minutes, Mr. Crump's eyes were closed tight, and he began to snore. You're under our spell, said George. When I snap my fingers, you will obey our every command. I will obey, mumbled Mr. Crump. All right, said George. Have you still got my videotape of me and Harold? Yes, mumbled Mr. Crump. Well, hand it over, Bob, George instructed. Mr. Crump unlocked a large file cabinet and opened the bottom drawer. He reached in and handed George the videotape. George stuffed it into his backpack. Harold looked a little different video out of his backpack and put it in the file cabinet. What's that video? Asked George. It's one of my little sister's old Boobin and Purple Dragon sing-along videos. Nice touch, said George. When Harold bent down to close the file cabinet, he took a quick look inside. Whoa! He cried. Look at all the stuff in here. The file cabinet was filled with everything Mr. Crump had taken away from the boys over the years. There was slingshots, whoopee cushions, skateboards, fake doggy doo-doo, you name it. It was in there. Look at this! Cried George. A big stack of Captain Underpants comics. He's got every issue, said Harold. For hours, the two boys sat on the floor laughing and reading their comics. Finally, George looked up at the clock. Yikes, he said. It's almost lunchtime. We better clean up a this mess and get to class. The boys looked up at their principal, who would be standing behind them in a trance all morning. Gee, I almost forgot about Mr. Crump, said Harold. What should we do with him? Could have some fun? Asked George. Why not? Said Harold. I haven't had any fun in the last 4 to 6 weeks. Cool, said George. He walked up to Mr. Crump and snapped his fingers. You are chicken, he said. Suddenly, Mr. Crump leaped onto his desk and flapped his arms. Look, he cried, kicking his papers. He was off the desk behind him and pecking at his pen and pencil set. George howled with laughter. Oh! Let me try. You are a monkey. You gotta snap your fingers. Oh yeah, said Harold. You're a monkey. Suddenly, Mr. Crump sprang off his desk and began swinging from the fluorescent light pictures. Woo! He shrieked, leaping from one side of the room to the other. George and Harold laughed so hard they almost cried. My turn, said George. Let's see, what should we turn him into next? I know, Harold said, holding up a Captain Underpants comic. Let's turn him into Captain Underpants. Good idea, said George. You are now the greatest superhero of all time, the amazing Captain Underpants. Mr. Crump tore down the red curtain from his office window and tied it around his neck. Then he took off his shoes, socks, shirt, pants, and his awful toupee. Tra-la-la! He said. Mr. Crump stood before them looking quite triumphant, with his cape blowing in the breeze of the open window. George and Harold were dumbfounded. You know, said George, he kind of looks like Captain Underpants. Yeah, Harold replied. After a short silence, the two boys looked at each other and burst into laughter. George and Harold had never laughed so hard in all their lives. Tears ran down their faces as they rolled about the floor, shrieking in hysterics. After a while, George had pulled himself up from the floor for another look. Hey! George cried. Where'd he go? George and Harold dashed to the window and looked out. There, running across the parking lot, was a pudgy old guy in his underwear with a red cape flowing behind him. Mr. Crump, come back! Shouted Harold. He won't answer to that, said George. He thinks he's Captain Underpants now. Oh no, said Harold. He's probably ready off to fight crime, said George. Oh no, said Harold. We gotta stop him, said George. Oh no! No way! Look, said George. He could get killed out there. Harold was unmoved. Or worse, said George. We could get into big trouble. You're right, said Harold. We gotta go after him. The two boys opened the bottom file cabinet drawer and took out their slingshots and skateboards. Do you think we should bring anything else? Asked Hal. Yeah, said George. Let's bring the fake Donkey Doo-Doo. Good thinking, said Hal. You never know when a fake Donkey Doo-Doo is going to come in handy. Hal stuffed Mr. Krup's clothes, shoes, toupee in his backpack. Then together the two boys leaped out the window, slid down the flagpole, and took off their skateboards after the amazing Captain Underpants. George and Hal rode their skateboards all over town looking for Captain Underpants. I can't find him anywhere, said Hal. You think a guy like him would be easy to spot, said George. Then the boys turned the corner, and there he was. Captain Underpants was standing in front of a bank, looking quite heroic. Mr. Krupp! Cried Hal. Shh, said George. Don't call him that, call him Captain Underpants. Oh yeah, said Harold. And don't forget to snap your fingers, said George. Right, said Harold. But before he got a chance, the bank doors flew wide open and out stepped the two robots. The robots took one look at Captain Underpants and stopped dead in their tracks. Surrender, said Captain Underpants. Or else the risotto wedgie power. Oh no, whispered Harold and George. Nobody moved for about 10 seconds. Finally, the robots looked at each other and burst out laughing. They dropped their loot and fell to the sidewalk screaming in hysterics. Almost immediately, the cops showed up and arrested the crooks. Let that be a lesson to you, cried Captain Underpants. Never underestimate the power of underwear. The police chief, looking quite angry, marched over to Captain Underpants. And just who the hell are you supposed to be? The police chief demanded. Why, I'm Captain Underpants, the world's greatest superhero, said Captain Underpants. I fight for truth, justice, and all that is pre-struck in quantity. Oh yeah? Shouted the police chief. Cover, boys! One of the cops took out his handcuffs and grabbed Captain Underpants by the arm. Uh-oh! Cried George. We gotta roll! Together the two boys zoomed into the crowd, weaving in and out of cops and bystanders. Harold skated up to Captain Underpants and knocked the superhero off his feet. George called on and the boys skated away with Captain Underpants on their shoulders. Stop! Cried the cops, but it was too late. George and Harold and Captain Underpants were gone. After their quick escape, George, Harold and Captain Underpants stopped on a deserted street corner to catch their breath. Okay, said George. Let's dehypnotize him quick before something else kaboom happens. A huge explosion came from the rare crystal shop across the street. Heavy smoke poured out of the building. Suddenly, two robots with one stolen crystal emerged from the smoke and jumped into an old van. Did I just see two robots get into a van? Asked Harold. You know, said George, up until now, this story was almost believable. Well, believable or not, said Harold, we're not getting involved. I repeat, we are not getting involved. Just then, Captain Underpants leaped from the street corner and dashed in front of the van. Stop in the name of underwear! He cried. Uh-oh, said George. I think we're involved. The two robots started up the van and swerved around Captain Underpants. Unfortunately, the van brushed up against his red cape, and it got caught. With a mighty jerk, Captain Underpants flipped backward, and the van pulled him along as it drove away. Grab him! Cried George. The two boys skateboarded with all their might toward the speeding van and grabbed Captain Underpants by the ankles. Help! They cried as the van pulled them through the city streets. Mummy, said a little boy sitting on a bench, I just saw two robots driving a van with a guy in his underwear hanging off the back by a red cape, pulling two boys on skateboards behind him with his feet. How do you expect me to believe such a ridiculous story? Asked his mother. Finally, the van came to a screeching halt in front of an old abandoned warehouse. The sudden stop made Captain Underpants flip over the roof of a van and crash through the front door of the building. Well, said a strange voice from inside the house. It looks like if we have a visitor. George and Harold hid behind the van until the coast was clear. Then they sneaked up to the hole in the door and peeked inside. Captain Underpants was all tied up. The two robots were standing guard, and a strange little man wearing a diaper was laughing manically. I'm the evil Dr. Diaper, the strange little man told Captain Underpants, and you'll be the first to witness my take over the world. Dr. Diaper placed the stolen crystal into a large machine called the Laser Magic 2000. The machine started to light up and make loud noises. heavy gears began shifting and spinning, and the laser beam from the crystal shot straight up through a hole in the roof. And examining each 20 minutes, the laser beam would blow up the moon and send huge chunk of it, and crashing down upon every major city in the world. Ha ha! Laughed Dr. Diaper. Then our rise from the rubble will take over the planet. Only one thing can help us now, said George. What? Asked Harold. Rubber Doggy Doo-Doo. Harold took the fake Doggy Doo-Doo and a slingshot from George's backpack and handed them to him. Be careful, said Harold. The fate of the entire planet is in your hands. With careful and precise aim, George shot the rubber doo-doo through the air and across the room. It landed with a plop right at the feet of Dr. Diaper. Yes, whispered George and Harold. Dr. Diaper looked down at the doo-doo between his feet and turned bright red. Oh dear me, he cried. I'm terribly embarrassed. Please excuse me. He began to waddle toward the restroom. This has never happened to me before, I assure you, he said. I guess with all the excitement, I just, oh dear. While Dr. Diaper was off changing himself, George and Harold sneaked into the old warehouse. Immediately, the robots detected the boys and began marching towards them. Destroy the intruders, said the robots. Destroy the intruders. George and Harold screamed and ran to the back of the warehouse. Luckily, George found 2 old boards and gave one of them to Harold. We're not going to have to resort to extremely graphic violence, are we? Asked Harold. I sure hope not, said George. Warning. The following chapter contains graphic scenes showing 2 boys beating the tar out of a couple of robots. If with high blood pressure or you faint at the slightest of motor oil, we strongly urge you to take better care of yourself and stop being such a child. Introducing Flipperama, Pilky brand. As everybody knows, there's nothing attached to silly action sequences more than really cheesy animation. And so, for the first time in history of great literature, we proudly bring you the latest and cheesy animation technology of the art of Flipperama. Here's how it works. Step 1. Place your left hand inside the dotted lines marked left hand here. Hold the book open flat. Step 2. Grasp the right hand page with your right thumb and index finger. Inside the dotted lines marked right thumb here. Step 3. Now quickly, you flip the right hand page back and forth until the picture appears to be animated. For extra fun, try it in your own sound effects. Okay. Here we go. Ah! 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 Whee! Ah! After defeating the robots, George and Harold untied Captain Underpants. Come on! Cried Harold. Let's get out of here! Wait! Said Captain Underpants. We have to save the world first! So George, Harold, and Captain Underpants frantically looked all over the laser magic house, searching for a way to shut it down and stop the inevitable disaster. Said Harold. I think this might be the level we want. He pulled the self-destruct lever with all his might. Suddenly, the laser-matic 2000 began to sputter and shake. The huge laser beam turned off, and pieces of the machine began flying off in all directions. It's gonna blow! Cried Harold. Run for your lives! Not so fast! Screamed Dr. Diaper, who appeared out of nowhere. He demolished 3 robots, teaches someone to laser-matic 2000, and you will have one chance to get taken over the world. But you won't live to tell the tale. Dr. Diaper pulled out his Diaper-matic 2000 ray gun and pointed it at George, Harold, and Captain Underpants. Captain Underpants quickly stretched a pair of underwear and shot at Dr. Diaper. The underwear landed right on the evil doctor's head. Help! Cried Dr. Diaper. I can't see! George and Harold ran out of the warehouse as fast as they could. Great shot, Captain Underpants! Cried Harold. There's just one thing I don't understand, said George. Where'd you get the extra pair of underwear? What extra pair? Said Captain Underpants. Never mind that, cried George. Let's just get out of here before that laser-matic 2000 Phoenix explodes. The laser-matic 2000 blew up, tearing apart the old warehouse. It sent flaming shards of red-hot metal in every direction. Fire fell from the skies around our heroes, and the earth began to crumble beneath their feet. Oh no! Cried Harold. We're doomed! Actually, they got away. George and Harold and Captain Underpants made a quick stop outside the police station. They tied Dr. Typer to a lamppost and attached a note to him. "There," said Captain Underpants. "Then I will explain everything." Then George and Harold led Captain Underpants back to Jerome Howard Elementary School. "Why are we going here?" asked Captain Underpants. "Well," said George, "you have some underwear work here." "Yeah," said Harold, reaching into his backpack. "Put these clothes on to make it snappy." "Don't forget your hair," said George. Captain Underpants quickly got dressed behind some bushes. "Well, how do I look?" he asked. "Pretty good," said George. "Not trying to look really bad." Captain Underpants made the nastiest face he could. "You know," said Harold, "you kind of look like Mr. Krupp." "Harold, he is Mr. Krupp." "Oh yeah," said Harold. "I owe those for months." Before long, they're all back inside Mr. Krupp's office. "Okay, Captain Underpants," said George. "You are now Mr. Krupp. Snap your fingers," whispered Harold. "Oh yeah," said George. "You are now Mr. Krupp." "Who is Mr. Krupp?" asked Captain Underpants. "Oh no!" cried Harold. "It's not working!" The boys tried again and again to de-hypnotize Captain Underpants, but nothing seemed to work. Said Harold. "Let me see the instruction manual for that ring." George checked his pants pockets. Said George. "I think I lost it." "You what?" cried Harold. The two boys searched through the office, but the 3D Hypno Ring instruction manual was nowhere to be found. "Never mind," said George. "I have an idea." He removed the flowers from a large vase in the corner. Then he poured all of the water over Captain Underpants' head. "What did you do that for?" cried Harold. "I saw him do this in a cartoon once," said George. "So it's gonna work." After a few minutes, Mr. Krupp slowly came to. "What's going on here?" he demanded. "And why am I all wet?" George and Harold had never been so glad to see Mr. Krupp in all their lives. "I'm so happy I could cry." "Well, you're gonna cry when I give that videotape to the football team," shouted Mr. Krupp. "I've had it with you two." Mr. Krupp took the videotape out of his file cabinet. "You boys are dead meat," he sneered. He stormed out of his office with the video and headed toward the gym. George and Harold smiled. "Wait till the football team sees that video," said Harold. "Yeah," said George. I sure hope they're like seeing purple dragons." "Hey, look," said George. "I found the 3D Hypno Ring instruction manual. It was in my shirt pocket, not my pants pocket." Well, throw my thing away," said I. "We'll never need it again." "I sure hope not," said George. Things at Jerome Howard Elementary School were never quite the same after that fateful day. The football team enjoyed Mr. Krupp's video so much that they changed their name from the Duckheads to the Purple Dragons to belong friends. The name change didn't go over too well with the fans, but hey, who's going to argue with a bunch of linebackers? George and Harold went back to their old ways, pulling pranks, cracking jokes, and making new comic books. They had to keep an eye on Mr. Krupp, though, because for some strange reason, every time he heard the sound of fingers snapping, Principal Krupp turned back into you-know-who. "Oh no!" cried Harold. "Here we go again," said George. "Tra-la-la!"